Here's another thing. Where have all of the sports scientists been with this? How come they've missed this one? Let's talk about nose breathing during exercise. Yes, of course, when you're doing physical exercise, your breathing rate, it gets faster. Your tidal volume, which is the volume of air you draw into your lungs in one breath, it gets bigger. But for many people, especially recreational athletes, there's no need for them to mouth breathe during physical exercise. Whether you're a competitive athlete or recreational, it should be all done with the mouth closed. Think of what your nose is doing for physical exercise that your mouth isn't doing. When you do physical exercise with your mouth closed, your muscles, of course, are producing more carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is going from the tissues into the blood. That blood is coming back to the lungs. But if you have your mouth closed during physical exercise, not all of that excess carbon dioxide can leave the body through the nose, so it accumulates in the lungs, and it accumulates in the blood leaving the lungs. And this is why you're more likely to feel that increased sensation of air hunger. But carbon dioxide isn't just this waste gas. Again, another misinformation about breathing out there. When carbon dioxide increases slightly in the lungs and blood, it dilates blood vessels. So we have 50,000 miles of blood vessels throughout the human body. Every 1 millimeter increase of CO2 improves blood flow to the brain by between 3 and 4%. So if you do physical exercise, say you go for a jog with your mouth closed, the carbon dioxide in your blood is likely to increase by about 3 millimeters of mercury. That's going to improve blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. Blood flow to the brain will increase by about 10%. Oxygen delivery will also increase due to what's called the Bohr effect. Now, a lot of people do physical exercise for mental health reasons, but they are doing physical exercise with their mouth open. They are breathing fast, they are breathing shallow. That's a greater stress response. You breathe through your nose. It's the best exercise possible, the best way you can do your physical exercise. Then you are really improving. You're not just, like for me, physical exercise isn't just about doing physical exercise. For me, physical exercise is a training for breathing, and it's also a training for the brain. So in other words, when somebody is doing their physical exercise, where is their attention? Are they merely just going through the motions and they're lost in thought, that they're not even paying attention to what they're doing? Or do they have their attention dispersed throughout the body? Is their mouth closed? If their mouth is closed, they have better recruitment of the diaphragm. They're helping to strengthen the diaphragm breathing muscle. They're helping to improve function of the diaphragm. They're improving gas exchange from the lungs into the blood. They're improving oxygen delivery from the blood to the working muscles. They're less likely to have soreness post-physical exercise. As you do physical exercise with your mouth closed, your body conserves moisture. Your dental health is improved because you're not going to have this dry mouth, which is associated with running. Also, as you do your physical exercise with your mouth closed, you're protecting the upper and lower airways. Now, long term, as you do physical exercise with your mouth closed, it improves your breathing patterns. Your chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide is lower. In other words, you have a higher tolerance towards carbon dioxide, and with that, then your breathing is lighter and your breathing is slower, and this induces relaxation. So if people simply, and like I heard Professor Mina yesterday talking about he spoke about, there was a study that came out, it doesn't really matter the physical exercise you do, walking or jogging, they're both very, very important. If you do 10 minutes of jogging, it's equivalent to a 30-minute walk. No mention of nose breathing. Like why is this not happening? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that your mouth does nothing for your breath. It's nothing. It's a hole, if I was to be crude about it. So mouth breathing should be seen as an emergency. And of course, when you start doing physical exercise with your mouth closed, the air hunger is a bit stronger. This is the load that you're putting onto your breathing. This is where you're helping to improve your breathing from a biochemical dimension and a biomechanical dimension. But thinking of blood flow to the brain. The brain, by regulating breathing, controls its own excitability. This was written back in 1988 by Somnian and Balestrino. And I'd forgotten about the paper. I wrote a book in 2010 for anxiety called Anxiety Free. And I'd forgotten, the book is still there. But then I was listening to Dr. Andrew Huberman. And he was talking about this paper. And he referenced the paper. And he referenced that exact sentence.
No.
And I went and I opened my book. I said, I know that sentence. And the exact same sentence that he had referenced, I had included in the book. The brain, by regulating breathing, controls its own excitability. How does it control its own excitability? Via carbon dioxide. But if we're doing our physical exercise with the mouth open, we're getting rid of all of that excess CO2 from the blood through the lungs. But if we do our physical exercise with the mouth closed, or we do our yoga or whatever movement, we go out and garden, we do whatever, any physical movement, keep your mouth closed, and it will have an enormous difference, not just for your breathing, but for your brain as well.
A good friend of mine is Sean Canan. He owns a company called Health Matters, and they do VO2 max testing. And I spoke to Sean probably a year and a half ago. I mentioned it to him. I mentioned that I tape my mouth going to bed. And he said to me, did you know that there's a significant improvement in VO2 max for people with their mouths closed while they do the test? I was like, no way, it's significant. And I said, why doesn't everybody do it? I said, most people find it too hard because they haven't trained themselves to do this. So as soon as it gets difficult, they mouth breathe. But that was my first exposure to this. You've worked with a lot of very high level athletes. What areas are they noting? And obviously we have mental clarity and stuff like that, but physical performance. Are they improving their endurance and their strength and their power? Is it more psychological or mental, not psychological, but physiological in the brain than in the actual muscles or oxygen delivery? Where are the areas that people are getting these big benefits?
When I work with an athlete, I'm not just working with them from a physiological point of view. I really want to get them out of their head. So I'm using the breath as an anchor.
Okay.
And I'm using it not just in terms of meditation as what people often think about meditation, that you're sitting in the lotus position. No. I want them to have their absolute undivided attention on what they are doing during their training, and to use their training as a means of training the brain to get the critical mind out of the way, that it's just them and what they are doing, the task at hand. And by bringing that then into their training, into their everyday life, that they have access to it during competition. So competitions are won not because of just physical performance, but mental performance is really, really important. So we can tie this in. So basically what I'm doing is I'm stacking breathing and mental training together. Now, one person recently, his first name is Ihor, I can't pronounce his second name, and he ran the longest race on earth, 717 kilometers, and he came second in it. And he puts the secret down to nose breathing.
Really?
So he read my book, The Oxygen Advantage, and he started putting it into practice. And there's an example. We have a lot of fighters. We have, about a month ago, I worked with about 30 Olympic in preparation for the Summer Olympics in different disciplines, fencing, kayaking, working with professional soccer players. I'm not known here in Ireland at all. So a lot of the athletes, Michael Conlon.
Oh yeah.
Because I can say that because he's mentioned it publicly. Who's an amazing individual, a great athlete. And he brings this into his work routine as well and his sleep. So coming back to what benefits could we expect? I like what Sean said. He said athletes switch from nose to mouth breathing because the air hunger gets too much. This is where you have to train yourself. Why give in that easy? Why not look at all of your physical training? And I'm not saying this isn't about sprinting with the mouth open. That's not feasible. There's a point at which the respiratory rate gets too much and the tidal volume is too much. You could be breathing 150 litres of air per minute. You can't do that with your mouth closed. But what I would say to anybody who's doing physical exercise, regardless of whatever level that you are at, keep nasal breathing as much as you can. When you feel that the intensity is getting a little bit too much, if you have to switch to mouth breathing for a short period of time, do that. But always go back to nose breathing. But the other thing is, challenge yourself with nasal breathing. Don't switch too soon. And bear in mind too that how you breathe during your physical exercise is going to influence gas exchange. If you're breathing fast and shallow, you waste a lot of air to dead space. So if you want to optimize what's called alveolar ventilation, that's gas exchange from the small little air sacs into the lungs, you have to be thinking about breathing nose, breathing slow, breathing low. Your diaphragm breathing muscle here, it's not just for respiration. It's providing stabilization for the spine. And with good functional breathing, using optimal movement of the diaphragm, you in turn influence what's called the zone of apposition or the generation of intra-abdominal pressure. But this in turn then will influence your movement. So functional breathing and functional movement go together. So if an individual has dysfunctional breathing, they're more likely to have dysfunctional movement. And if they have dysfunctional movement, they're more likely to be at risk of injury. They have disproportionate breathlessness. They have increased lactic acid and fatigue. There's a lot going on, and also the risk of overtraining. So, and the point here, there's a couple of points. Physical exercise will not improve your breathing patterns unless you have your mouth closed. So you could be the fittest person on earth, but if you could still have a breathing pattern disorder. And in one paper which was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, 90% of the athletes, they looked at 1,900 different athletes in Japan, ranging from different ages. 90% of these athletes had dysfunctional breathing from a biomechanical point of view. These individuals are breathing upper chest. But the problem with this is that it places extra demands on their system. We should be using physical training as a means of fine-tuning the individual that they can do more with less. So, in terms of oxygen delivery, we know that the fraction of expired oxygen is less with mouth breathing versus nose breathing. And if you can get more oxygen to the working muscles, you're staying aerobically for longer. We also superimpose breath holds. So I was with athletes at the weekend. We had 35 people. A lot of them had come in internationally. There were a few from Ireland. There were athletes. We had 3 medical doctors, cardiologists, physios, in their health professions as well. And one of the routines that we do is repeated sprint abilities, but we don't do them with mouth breathing. We do it with breath holding. So part of this routine would be you breathe in and out through your nose, you pinch your nose and hold your nose, and you sprint for 40 meters on a breath hold. And then you have a 30-second of semi-active recovery, just kind of walking with no slow, low breathing to recover. And then we do a 40-meter sprint again. And then a 30-second rest and a 40-meter sprint again, all with breath holding. So what we are doing there is, well, the athlete already, if they're a team player, team sports, repeated sprint ability is a performance indicator. Because this reflects your ability to do almost all-out effort, followed by a very brief recovery before you have to do all-out effort again. Where we get our sprint, and I superimpose a breath hold on it. And this is pushing out the boundaries. Now, what that does is that we lower their blood oxygen saturation to about 85%, which is, it is severe hypoxia, but it's actually very safe. And we increase carbon dioxide in the blood to about 50 plus millimeters of mercury. We completely disturb the blood acid-base balance, much more than if they were sprinting with their mouth open. And this then forces their body to make adaptations, including improved buffering capacity inside in the muscle compartment, which in turn is delaying lactic acid and fatigue. But another thing is that we are, from a psychological point of view, we're putting these people into a state of suffocation, and we're training them to be able to cope with breathlessness, to reduce their perception of breathlessness, and to surrender to discomfort. It's a stress. It's not just a physiological stress. We're not just putting a physiological stress in the body. We're putting a psychological stress on them. So superimposing breathing exercises that are safe for those individuals. Now, bear in mind, do not practice that at home unless you're a well-trained athlete. And what I would say is don't start from nothing to 40 meters. If you don't have, well, first of all, if you're pregnant, please don't do it. If you have any cardiovascular issues, don't do long breath holds or hyperventilation. If you suffer from panic, anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue syndrome, if there's any dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, don't use breathing exercises that are going to stress you. And the breathing exercises that stress you are hyperventilation and long breath holds. So if you want to so we have to divide people into 2 groups. People that we want to target the autonomic nervous system to bring balance. Now, we do this with everybody anyway, but there's also the other group of individuals that we do deliberately want to stress them. Because, of course, if we can impose a good stress to the point that we cause those bodily adaptations, it is conducive to improve sports performance. So, breathing exercises should be in sports. We're going to start to see more research. We would love to. It's absolutely wide open because nobody is doing it.
Yeah.